The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Wellington's Manhattan penthouse as he stared at the financial reports scattered across his mahogany desk. At 45, Marcus had built Wellington Industries from a small construction company into a billion-dollar empire spanning real estate, technology, and renewable energy. But tonight, the numbers told a different story. "Darling, you've been in there for hours," came the silky voice of his wife Victoria as she glided into his home office. Her designer dress hugged her perfectly sculpted figure, and her blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders like liquid gold. At 35, she was everything Manhattan society expected of a billionaire's wife. Beautiful, charming, and impeccably dressed. Marcus looked up from his papers, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the weight of what he'd discovered. The Henderson deal fell through. The investors are pulling out of 3 major projects simultaneously. His voice was steady, but Victoria could see the tension in his jaw. "Oh no," Victoria said, moving behind his chair and placing her manicured hands on his shoulders. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we might lose everything," Marcus replied, though something in his tone suggested he wasn't telling her everything. "The banks are calling in loans. The board is panicking. We're looking at potential bankruptcy within 6 months." Victoria's hands stilled for a moment, a reaction so brief that most people would have missed it. But Marcus had learned to read people like his mentor, the wise old businessman Solomon Carter, had taught him years ago. "A wise man observes not just what is said, but what is left unsaid," Solomon had told him during their weekly chess games. "I'm sure you'll find a way," Victoria said, resuming her massage. "You always do. You're the smartest man I know." As thunder crashed outside, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He would implement something Solomon had once called the ultimate test of character, a strategy so bold and risky that it would either save his empire or destroy it completely. But first, he needed to know who he could truly trust. 3 weeks later, the financial media was ablaze with headlines. Wellington Industries files for Chapter 11 and Billionaire's empire crumbles. Marcus sat in his significantly downsized office in Queens, a far cry from his former Manhattan headquarters, reading the articles with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The Bankruptcy was a masterpiece of financial engineering. Working with a small trusted team of advisors, Marcus had restructured his assets, moved key investments into untraceable offshore entities, and created a labyrinth of legal protections that would make his wealth invisible to creditors and, more importantly, to anyone who might have ulterior motives. "You sure about this, boss?" asked Tommy Rodriguez, his head of security and one of only 3 people who knew the truth. Tommy had been with Marcus since the early days, when Wellington Industries was just Marcus and a handful of contractors. "Solomon once told me, 'He who walks with the wise grows wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm,'" Marcus replied, loosening his tie. "I need to find out who my real companions are." The transformation was remarkable. Gone were the custom suits, replaced by off-the-rack clothing from department stores. The penthouse was sold to pay creditors, actually transferred to a trust, and Marcus now lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Victoria had insisted on keeping their house in the Hamptons, claiming it was essential for maintaining appearances during the bankruptcy proceedings. That evening, Marcus returned to their temporary Brooklyn home to find Victoria on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. She quickly ended the call when she saw him. "Who was that?" he asked casually, setting down his briefcase. "Just my sister," Victoria replied quickly. "She's worried about us." Marcus nodded, but made a mental note. Victoria's sister lived in Seattle and rarely called, especially not at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. More importantly, he'd heard Victoria say tomorrow night just before she hung up, words that didn't fit with a casual conversation about their financial troubles. "I picked up Chinese food," Marcus said, holding up the takeout bags. "I know it's not what we're used to, but it's fine," Victoria interrupted, though her smile seemed strained. "I'm actually not very hungry. I think I'll take a bath and go to bed early." As Victoria headed toward the bathroom, Marcus noticed she'd left her phone face down on the kitchen counter, a habit she'd never had before their financial troubles began. The next evening, Marcus told Victoria he had to work late, reviewing bankruptcy documents with his lawyers. Instead, he sat in Tommy's surveillance van outside an upscale restaurant in Soho, watching through high-powered cameras as his wife of 8 years shared an intimate dinner with David Blackwood, his former business partner and the man who had orchestrated the collapse of the Henderson deal. "I'm sorry, boss," Tommy muttered, adjusting the camera focus. "I've been tracking her for a week. This is the 3rd time they've met." Through the telephoto lens, Marcus watched Victoria laugh at something David said, her hand covering his across the table. The pain in his chest was sharp and immediate, but he forced himself to remain objective. Solomon had taught him that emotion was the enemy of wisdom. "It's not just an affair," Marcus said quietly, studying David's body language. "Look at how they're positioned. They're not lovers stealing a moment. They're conspirators planning something." The next morning, Marcus implemented phase 2 of his plan. He called his attorney, James Harrison, one of the few people who knew about the fake bankruptcy. "I need you to leak something to Victoria's lawyer," Marcus said. "Let it slip that there might be a significant life insurance payout coming my way, something about a loophole in the bankruptcy proceedings." "You sure you want to do this, Marcus?" James asked. "Once we start down this path, a prudent man foresees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it," Marcus quoted. "Solomon taught me that preparation is the key to survival." Within 48 hours, Victoria's behavior changed dramatically. She became overly affectionate, cooking Marcus's favorite meals and suggesting they spend more time together. She also began asking subtle questions about his health, his stress levels, and whether he'd been taking his blood pressure medication. Marcus had never taken blood pressure medication in his life. That weekend, Victoria suggested they take a romantic getaway to their cabin in the Adirondacks, a remote location they'd visited only twice during their marriage, both times at her suggestion. "It'll be good for us," she said, her arms wrapped around his neck. "Just you and me away from all this stress and chaos." Marcus agreed, but not before calling Tommy. "I'll wear a wire, and I want you positioned within a half-mile radius," he instructed. "And Tommy, bring back up." The cabin sat on a bluff overlooking Lake Placid, surrounded by dense forest that would muffle any sounds. As Marcus carried their bags inside, he noticed Victoria had packed an unusually large suitcase for a weekend trip. She'd also insisted on bringing a bottle of his favorite wine, a vintage he'd never seen before. "I thought we could have a romantic dinner tonight," Victoria said, her smile radiant as she unpacked groceries. "Like we used to when we were first married." Marcus watched her movements carefully. Everything was choreographed, planned. She was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged items in the kitchen, and she kept checking her phone. "Expecting a call?" he asked. "Oh, just worried about the bankruptcy proceedings," she replied quickly. "You know how these lawyers are. They want to reach us even on weekends." As the sun set over the lake, Victoria prepared dinner while Marcus sat on the deck, apparently enjoying the peaceful view. In reality, he was testing the small recording device Tommy had given him and noting the unusual number of text messages Victoria was sending. During dinner, Victoria was unusually talkative, reminiscing about their early days together, their wedding, their dreams for the future. She also kept refilling his wineglass, despite the fact that he was barely touching the dark red liquid. "You seem tired, darling," she said, reaching across the table to touch his forehead. "Are you feeling all right?" Marcus pretended to rub his temples. "Just a headache, and I do feel a bit strange. Maybe I'm coming down with something." Victoria's eyes brightened almost imperceptibly. "Poor baby. Why don't you lie down? I'll clean up here and join you in a bit." Marcus excused himself and went to the bedroom, where he immediately spat out the small amount of wine he'd been holding in his mouth. Through the thin walls, he could hear Victoria on the phone. "Yes, it's working," she whispered urgently. "He's getting drowsy. No, I gave him twice the amount you suggested. It should look completely natural. A heart attack brought on by the stress of bankruptcy. Yes, the insurance pays out even in bankruptcy, if it's death by natural causes." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. His own wife, the woman he'd loved, trusted, built a life with, was trying to kill him for insurance money she didn't even know didn't exist. He activated the recording device and lay down on the bed, pretending to be unconscious. 20 minutes later, Victoria entered the bedroom with David Blackwood. Marcus controlled his breathing, appearing deeply unconscious while listening to every word. "He's completely out," Victoria whispered. "The drug should suppress his heart rate gradually. It'll look like cardiac arrest brought on by stress." "And you're sure about the insurance money?" David asked, his voice cold and calculating. $200 million tax-free, Victoria replied. "The policy was taken out before the bankruptcy, so it's protected. We'll wait 6 months, then disappear to the Cayman Islands like we planned." Marcus fought every instinct to open his eyes as he felt David check his pulse. "Heart rate's dropping," David confirmed. "Another hour and it'll be over." "Good," Victoria said. "I'm tired of pretending to love this boring old man. Once he's gone, we'll have everything we ever wanted." The callousness in her voice was like a physical blow. 8 years of marriage, and she'd been planning this from the beginning. Marcus remembered how she'd insisted on the life insurance policy, claiming it was responsible planning for our future. "What about his security guy, Tommy?" David asked. "He thinks Marcus is reviewing documents in the city," Victoria replied. "By the time anyone finds the body, we'll be long gone. I'll play the grieving widow perfectly. I've been practicing." As their footsteps receded, Marcus opened his eyes and immediately began recording a video message on his phone, documenting everything he'd heard. Then he sent a coded text to Tommy. "The Eagle has landed." Within minutes, Marcus heard vehicles approaching the cabin. But instead of help, it was more of David's men. Apparently, they weren't taking any chances. "Secure the perimeter," he heard David instruct. "No one gets in or out until this is finished." Marcus realized he was trapped. The drug Victoria had given him was making him genuinely drowsy, and he could feel his heart rate actually slowing. Whatever she'd used, it was real and potentially lethal. Drawing on every lesson Solomon had taught him about staying calm under pressure, Marcus began to plan his escape. "The wise heart will know the proper time and procedure," he whispered to himself, one of Solomon's favorite proverbs. Using the last of his strength, Marcus managed to slip out of the cabin through a bathroom window facing the lake. The cold mountain air helped clear his head slightly, but he knew he didn't have much time before the drug's effects became irreversible. He stumbled through the forest, using his phone's GPS to navigate toward a predetermined rendezvous point where Tommy would be waiting. Behind him, he could hear shouts as Victoria and David discovered his escape. "Find him!" David's voice echoed through the trees. "He can't have gone far in his condition." Marcus pressed forward, drawing on reserves of strength he didn't know he possessed. Solomon had always told him that the human spirit was capable of extraordinary things when survival was at stake. "The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all," he repeated to himself. 20 minutes later, exhausted and barely conscious, Marcus reached a clearing where Tommy and 3 FBI agents were waiting. The recording device had been transmitting everything to a federal task force that had been investigating David Blackwood for securities fraud. "We got it all, boss," Tommy said, helping Marcus into the ambulance that was standing by. Every word. As paramedics worked to counteract the drug in his system, Marcus watched through the ambulance windows as FBI agents surrounded the cabin. Victoria and David were arrested without incident, their faces showing shock and disbelief as they realized their perfect plan had crumbled. "The insurance policy," Marcus managed to say to Agent Sarah Mitchell, who was riding with him to the hospital. "Check her phone records. She's been planning this for months, maybe years." At the hospital, as doctors worked to stabilize him, Marcus reflected on Solomon's greatest lesson. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." He had trusted his instincts, prepared for the worst, and ultimately his wisdom had saved his life. But the hardest part was yet to come, rebuilding not just his empire, but his ability to trust again. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the boardroom of Wellington Industries' new headquarters in downtown Manhattan. The bankruptcy had been quietly reversed, his assets restored, and his business empire was stronger than ever. The fake financial crisis had actually allowed him to identify and eliminate weak partners while attracting new, more reliable investors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus addressed his board of directors, "I want to thank you for your patience during what the media called our miraculous recovery. The truth is, sometimes you have to appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak." Victoria and David had both been sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. The investigation had revealed that Victoria had been planning Marcus's death since their 2nd year of marriage, systematically learning about his business, his assets, and his vulnerabilities. Tommy knocked on the boardroom door. "Boss, there's someone here to see you." Marcus smiled as Solomon Carter walked into the room. At 78, Solomon moved slowly, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. The old man had been Marcus's mentor for over 20 years, teaching him not just business strategy, but life wisdom drawn from biblical principles. "I heard you put my teachings to good use," Solomon said with a wry smile as they embraced. "Your lessons saved my life," Marcus replied. "Literally. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips," Solomon quoted. "But more importantly, a man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. You planned well, but you also had divine protection." As they walked to Marcus's office, Solomon shared news that made Marcus's recovery even sweeter. The Henderson deal that supposedly fell through, the investors want back in. They've seen how you handled adversity and they're impressed. You're looking at a project worth $3 billion. Marcus poured 2 glasses of brandy. Real brandy this time, not drugged wine. I learned something important through all this, he said. Wealth means nothing if you can't trust the people closest to you. But wisdom, true wisdom, that's the real treasure. And what will you do now? Solomon asked. Marcus walked to his window, looking out at the city lights. Build something better, stronger. And this time I'll be more careful about who I let into my inner circle. 3 months later, Marcus married Sarah Mitchell, the FBI agent who had helped save his life. Their wedding was small, attended only by people who had proven their loyalty during his darkest hour. As they danced to their first song as husband and wife, Sarah whispered in his ear, "No secrets between us, ever. No secrets," Marcus agreed, holding her close. But plenty of wisdom. The billionaire who had faked his own bankruptcy to expose his wife's deadly betrayal had learned Solomon's greatest lesson. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the integrity of those who stand beside you when the storms of life threaten to destroy everything you've built. And in the end, that wisdom had made him richer than he'd ever imagined possible. 2 years after Victoria's conviction, Marcus stood in the conference room of the Solomon Carter Foundation, a non-profit organization he had established to teach financial literacy and ethical business practices to young entrepreneurs. The foundation was named after his mentor, who had passed away peacefully 6 months earlier, leaving Marcus a letter that would change his perspective forever. Before we begin today's session, Marcus addressed the group of 20 young business owners. I want to share something with you. Success isn't just about building wealth. It's about building character that can withstand any storm. Among the attendees was Elena Vasquez, a 28-year-old immigrant from El Salvador who had started a small catering business in Queens. Her story reminded Marcus of his own humble beginnings, but her challenges were far greater. She was supporting 3 younger siblings while trying to grow her business with almost no capital. Mr. Wellington, Eleanor raised her hand tentatively. My biggest problem isn't lack of ideas, it's lack of trust. I've been betrayed by 2 business partners who took my recipes and started competing companies. How do you learn to trust again after betrayal? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He saw his own pain reflected in her eyes and realized that his experience with Victoria had given him something invaluable to share. Eleanor, let me tell you about the most expensive lesson I ever learned, Marcus began, and for the first time publicly, he shared the complete story of his fake bankruptcy and Victoria's betrayal. The room was silent as he spoke. When he finished, Elena wiped tears from her eyes. How did you find the strength to trust Sarah? I learned to distinguish between blind trust and wise trust, Marcus replied. Blind trust is given without evidence. Wise trust is earned through consistent actions over time. Solomon wrote, "The simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps." After the session, Marcus approached Elena privately. I'd like to offer you something, he said. Not just money, but mentorship. I see potential in you that reminds me of myself 25 years ago. That evening, Marcus returned home to find Sarah in their study, reviewing legal documents. At 7 months pregnant with their first child, she was still working part-time as a consultant for the FBI's white-collar crime division. How was the foundation meeting? She asked, looking up from her papers. Life-changing, Marcus replied, settling beside her on the couch. I think I'm finally understanding what Solomon meant when he said, "Cast your bread upon the waters, and it will return to you after many days." Sarah smiled and placed his hand on her growing belly. Speaking of returns, someone's been very active today. I think she knows her daddy's voice. As Marcus felt his daughter kick, he realized that everything he'd been through, the betrayal, the pain, the near-death experience, had led him to this moment. He was about to become a father, and more importantly, he had wisdom to pass on that money could never buy. The knock on Marcus's office door came at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October. He was working late, reviewing plans for the foundation's expansion to 5 new cities, when Tommy entered with a grave expression. "Boss, we have a problem," Tommy said, closing the door behind him. "I just got word from my contact at the bureau. Victoria's been moved to a minimum security facility, and she's been making phone calls." Marcus looked up from his documents, immediately alert. "What kind of phone calls?" "She's been in contact with her cousin, Michael Reeves," Tommy continued. "You remember him, the one who testified at her trial about her good character." Marcus remembered Michael well, a smooth-talking investment advisor who had always made him uncomfortable. During the trial, Michael had painted Victoria as a loving wife who had simply fallen in with the wrong crowd. "What's he up to?" Marcus asked. Tommy handed him a folder. "He's been asking questions about the foundation, about your new investments, about Sarah's schedule. My source says Victoria's been telling him that you stole her rightful inheritance through the fake bankruptcy." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "She's planning something." "There's more," Tommy said grimly. "Michael's been meeting with some of David Blackwood's old associates, the ones who didn't get caught in the original investigation." That night, Marcus called an emergency meeting with his security team and Sarah. Despite being 8 months pregnant, Sarah insisted on participating from their secure home office. "This feels different from Victoria's original plan," Sarah analyzed, studying the surveillance photos Tommy had gathered. "Victoria was motivated by greed, but this feels personal. She wants revenge." Marcus paced the room, his mind racing through possibilities. "Solomon always taught me that pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Victoria's pride was wounded when her plan failed. Now she wants to hurt me in ways that money can't fix." "The foundation," Sarah said suddenly. "She's not after your money this time. She's after your reputation, your legacy." The next morning, Marcus received a call from Elena Vasquez. Her voice was shaking with fear. "Mr. Wellington, something terrible has happened. My restaurant was broken into last night, but nothing was stolen. Instead, they left something behind. Photos of my family in El Salvador with red X's marked over their faces." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "Elena, pack a bag right now. Tommy's coming to get you and bring you somewhere safe." As he hung up the phone, Marcus realized that Victoria's revenge wouldn't just target him. She was going after everyone he cared about, everyone he was trying to help. "A wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident," he murmured, remembering one of Solomon's warnings. This time he would need more than financial strategy to protect the people he loved. Marcus stood in the secure conference room of a private security firm in Midtown Manhattan, surrounded by former FBI agents, ex-military personnel, and cybersecurity experts. On the wall-mounted screens were photos and profiles of Victoria's network of associates, now expanded to include Michael Reeves and 3 of David Blackwood's former colleagues. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus addressed the team, "this is no longer about protecting my assets. They're targeting innocent people, young entrepreneurs, my pregnant wife, anyone connected to the foundation." Agent Patricia Wells, Sarah's former colleague who now ran the security firm, pointed to a detailed timeline on one of the screens. "Victoria's been orchestrating this for 6 months. She's convinced Michael and the others that you have a secret account containing $2 billion, money she claims you stole from her through the fake bankruptcy." "But that's impossible," Marcus replied. "The bankruptcy was fake, but all the money was always mine. She never had any legal claim to it." "Logic doesn't matter when you're dealing with revenge," Patricia explained. "She's painted you as the villain who destroyed her life, and she's recruited people who want to believe that narrative." Tommy spread additional photos across the conference table. "It gets worse, boss. They've been tracking the foundation's beneficiaries. Helena was just the first warning. They know about Marcus Jr.'s college fund. They know about the scholarship recipients. They even know about the anonymous donations you've been making to small businesses." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger, but forced himself to remain calm. Solomon had taught him that anger without wisdom was destructive. "What do they want?" "Public humiliation," Patricia answered. "They're planning to expose what they're calling your fake charity scheme, claiming you're using the foundation to launder money and avoid taxes. They want to destroy your reputation and make you a pariah in the business community." Sarah, participating via secure video link from their heavily guarded home, spoke up from the screen. "There's something else, Marcus. I've been analyzing Victoria's prison correspondence through my FBI contacts. She's not just angry. She's genuinely convinced herself that she was the victim in your marriage. In her mind, she's the hero of this story." Marcus absorbed this information, understanding for the first time the depth of Victoria's delusion. "So, this isn't just about money or revenge. She actually believes she's righteous, which makes her more dangerous," Sarah confirmed. "Righteous anger is harder to negotiate with than simple greed." Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. "I want to meet with Michael Reeves." "Boss, that's exactly what they want," Tommy protested. "It's obviously a trap." "Of course it's a trap," Marcus replied calmly. "But Solomon taught me that sometimes The best way to defeat an enemy is to give them exactly what they think they want. By wisdom, a house is built, and through understanding, it is established. Patricia leaned forward. What do you have in mind? Marcus smiled, and for the first time in weeks he felt the familiar confidence that had built his empire. I'm going to teach Michael Reeves the same lesson Victoria learned, that underestimating your opponent is the fastest way to destroy yourself. The meeting was set for noon on a Saturday at a small cafe in Brooklyn Heights, chosen by Michael because it was public enough to seem safe, but isolated enough for private conversation. Marcus arrived alone as requested, but Tommy and 3 agents were positioned throughout the area. Michael Reeves looked older than his 42 years, with the desperate edge of a man who had bet everything on one final scheme. He sat across from Marcus with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the cards. Marcus Wellington, Michael said with a cold smile, the great philanthropist. Tell me, how does it feel to know that everyone's about to learn what you really are? Marcus remained calm, sipping his coffee as he studied Michael's body language. What is it you think I am, Michael? A thief, Michael replied without hesitation. You stole Victoria's rightful share of the wealth she helped you build, then had her framed for attempted murder when she tried to claim what was hers. Marcus almost laughed at the twisted logic, but kept his expression neutral. Is that what she told you? That's what I figured out for myself, Michael said, leaning forward. Victoria was always too trusting, too pure-hearted to see your manipulations, but I saw through you from the beginning. I see, Marcus replied. And what do you want from me? Michael slid a document across the table. $1 billion transferred to an account I control. In exchange, I'll call off the media campaign that's going to destroy your precious foundation and expose you as a fraud. Marcus glanced at the document without picking it up. And if I refuse? Then, by Monday morning, every major news outlet will have evidence of your money laundering, tax evasion, and charity fraud, Michael said triumphantly. Your pregnant wife will be dragged through congressional hearings, and every young entrepreneur you've helped will be investigated for complicity in your crimes. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, appearing to consider the offer. In reality, he was giving the surveillance team time to record Michael's extortion attempt and trace the digital signatures on the documents. You know, Michael, Marcus finally said, Victoria made the same mistake you're making now. What mistake? She assumed I was the same person she married, naive, trusting, unprepared for betrayal. Marcus's voice remained conversational, but his eyes grew cold. She didn't realize that betrayal had taught me to prepare for war. Michael's confidence wavered slightly. What are you talking about? Marcus pulled out his phone and played a recording of Michael's extortion demands from just moments earlier. Every word you've said in the last 10 minutes has been recorded and transmitted to the FBI. More importantly, the evidence you've been gathering against me was fed to you by my team. The color drained from Michael's face. That's impossible. Is it? The bank records showing suspicious transfers, we created them and made sure you'd find them. The testimony from whistleblowers about the foundation, actors paid to feed you false information. Even your meeting with David Blackwood's associates was orchestrated by us. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Solomon taught me that all the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the motives. Your motives were never pure, Michael. They were greedy and vindictive. Michael stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can, Marcus replied calmly. As if on cue, Agent Patricia Wells appeared at their table with 2 uniformed officers. Michael Reeves, you're under arrest for extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and making terroristic threats against Elena Vasquez and her family. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, Marcus felt no satisfaction, only sadness. Another person had allowed greed and resentment to destroy their life. But the hardest part was still to come, his final confrontation with Victoria herself. The Federal Women's Correctional Facility in Connecticut was a stark gray building surrounded by high walls and razor wire. Marcus had never imagined he would voluntarily enter such a place, but Victoria had requested a meeting, and he needed closure for both of them. Victoria looked different after 2.5 years in prison. Her once perfect appearance had been replaced by the harsh reality of institutional life. Her blonde hair had grown out, showing dark roots, and her designer clothing had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit, but her eyes still held the same cold calculation that had nearly cost him his life. "Hello, Marcus," she said, as he sat across from her in the visitor's room. "Thank you for coming." "Victoria." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "I hear you wanted to talk." "I suppose you're here to gloat," she said, her lips curving into a bitter smile. The great Marcus Wellington, the man who destroyed my life and sent my cousin to prison. Marcus studied her face, looking for any sign of remorse or understanding. He found none. Is that really how you see this, Victoria? That I destroyed your life? Didn't you? She snapped. You had me framed for attempted murder, stole the money I was entitled to as your wife, and now you've ruined Michael too. All because I threatened your precious ego. Marcus felt a deep sadness wash over him. Even now, facing decades in prison, Victoria couldn't acknowledge her own actions. Victoria, you tried to kill me. You drugged me and planned to watch me die so you could collect insurance money and run away with David. You were never supposed to find out, she said, as if that made a difference. It would have been quick and painless, and I deserved that money. I spent 8 years married to a boring, obsessive workaholic who cared more about his business than his wife. So that justified murder? Victoria leaned forward, her eyes flashing with anger. You want to talk about murder? What about what you did to me? You murdered my dreams, my future, my identity. I was supposed to be somebody, Marcus. Instead, I was just an accessory to your success. Marcus realized then that Victoria would never understand. In her mind, she would always be the victim, always be justified in her actions. It was both tragic and liberating. I came here hoping to find some trace of the woman I married, Marcus said quietly. Some sign that the love we shared was real, even if it ended badly. Love? Victoria laughed harshly. I never loved you, Marcus. I loved what you could give me. And when you couldn't give me enough, I decided to take it. The words should have hurt, but Marcus felt only pity. Then I'm sorry for you, Victoria. Not because of where you are, but because of who you've chosen to become. He stood to leave, but Victoria's voice stopped him. It's not over, Marcus. Even from here I can reach you. I have friends, connections, people who owe me favors. Someday, when you least expect it. Marcus turned back to face her one last time. Victoria, Solomon taught me that hatred stirs up conflict, but love covers over all wrongs. I choose to love the memory of who I thought you were, and to forgive the person you actually are. That's the only way I can be free of this. As he walked away, Victoria screamed after him, her voice echoing through the visitor's room. But Marcus didn't look back. He had learned the hardest lesson of all, that some people choose darkness, and no amount of love or wisdom can save them from themselves. Outside the prison, Sarah was waiting in their car with their 6-month-old daughter, Grace. As Marcus held his child, feeling her tiny hand grip his finger, he understood that this was what victory really looked like. Not defeating his enemies, but building something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Is it over? Sarah asked gently. Marcus kissed his daughter's forehead and then his wife's lips. Yes, he said, it's finally over.